Blog Talk Radio.
To honor America with the performance of the national anthem, 8-time Grammy Award winner, Chris Stapleton.
Oh, see, and you see by the dawn's early light, oh, proudly we hailed at the twilight that's gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight. Oh, the ramparts we were so gallantly streaming, and the rockets regular of our birds singing through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say, does that star-spangled banner yet wave? Oh, the land of the free and the home of the
Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Medlock Post on this March 14th, 2023.
Lone Ranger. A fiery horse with the speed of light, a cloud of dust, and a hearty Hi-Yo Silver. The Lone Ranger.
Folks, do we need the Lone Ranger to pull America out here? This getting kind of interesting, real interesting. This is episode 123 on March 14th, 2023, and I am your host, Richard G. Medlock, and this is the Medlock Post radio show. The views and opinions on the Medlock Post radio show are the views and opinions of the host. They are not necessarily the views and opinions of Blog Talk Radio, Spreaker.com, its corporations, affiliates, or any other podcast streaming services that we go out in the airways on. And we appreciate their support. The banking in America today is our topic today. Banking in America today. There's been a lot going on since last week, especially since Friday, and we're going to try to put things into perspective for you and help you understand this. So, a couple of items before we get there. March 14th, 1879, Albert Einstein was born on this day. Happy birthday, Dr. Einstein. Yesterday, the California courts ruled that Uber and Lyft can classify their drivers as independent contractors. That's a huge victory for capitalism. The federal government and the states have been going for years trying to do away with independent contractor simply because they feel like they can collect more taxes if they're an employee. Plus, they get the employer having to pay the employee benefits, FICA and Medicare and all that good stuff. That doesn't happen under Uber and Lyft. Now, they have to pay it themselves as an independent contractor. Now, President Biden is expected to announce again today an executive order that would expand background checks to more firearm sales by expanding the statutory definition of a firearms dealer. So here again, by executive order, he's trying to create law or change the law. That's wrong. The inflation report came out this morning for February, and to no one's surprise, actually it was. They actually thought inflation was going down. It's still running at 6% year to year. The CPI stayed the same. The core stayed the same, the core CPI, but some other things, indices went up. They came in hotter. Inflation is here, folks, to stay. It's not going anywhere, and it's by design. Now, as we get into this banking situation and how it's affecting you and I, as individuals, as families, as consumers, as workers, as business owners, I can say that everything that is going on in the economy today, the high inflation, the interest rates going up, the problem with the banks, the challenges there, and other things going on in our country can all be pointed back to the government as the cause. As the cause. I sat there yesterday afternoon listening to Larry Kudlow and his great guest he had on there. And I'm sitting there going, they're talking about, well, this government thing and that government thing and this regulation and that regulation and this rule and that rule and on and on. And it just, everything that is negative in America right now, financially and economically, is attributed to policies from the Biden administration, from the Democratic Marxists. Everything. Now, the question at this time is, how did we arrive at this banking and financial situation in America? Why are we here today? Why is banking in America today a challenge? Why are we here? Well, you're thinking in your mind going back to January 2021 when Biden was sworn in as president, right? Yeah, that's true. But we need to go back 110 years to 1913. That's when all of this really started. That's when the Federal Reserve Bank was set up as a central bank that took control of the money printing and delivering control in the markets away from Congress and gave it to a central bank, the Federal Reserve, which is not a federal agency, folks. It is not. And then in 1913, we had the 16th Amendment, which gave us the Internal Revenue Service, or income taxes. And then we also had Amendment 17, and you say, well, how does that affect us? Well, Amendment 17 changed how U.S. senators got into office. prior to that amendment, they were elected or appointed by their state legislatures to go to Washington, D.C. to protect the state's rights from the House of Representatives and any law they might come up with that would take those states' rights away. Now they're elected by the people. So that safeguard between the federal government and the states was taken away. So those three things in 1913. But let's focus on the Federal Reserve for right now. In 1913, let's take the value of the dollar, the U.S. dollar in 1913, and what that value is today. It is less 96%. So that dollar that you had in 1913, or your grandparents or your parents, is now only worth 4 cents. That's why you have inflation. And then the other thing, I didn't put this in my notes, but the other thing that happened was Richard Nixon took us off the gold standard. And it really broke off then. It really caused havoc, not only in the United States, but around the world. So let's go back some more in history. And let's go to the 1989-1990 savings and loan industry debacle. When President H.W. Bush, the first Bush, was in office after Reagan. And remember, the Bushes, both Bushes, are globalists. They spoke many times of a new world order or a new world government. Go back and search speeches over and over. They talked about it. The savings and loan industry, and I was in commercial real estate at the time, big time. I was all over the Southeast and the East Coast doing commercial real estate deals. I worked with major developers. And all of a sudden, the economy was rolling because of Reagan policies, and growth was taking place. So these S&Ls, especially out of Texas and Oklahoma, but mostly Texas, they were building like crazy. And all these Texas developers, and I'm not blaming it all on Texas, folks. It's just that I dealt with several of them. And they were building apartment buildings. They weren't doing subdivisions, but they were doing apartments. And they were doing office buildings and shopping centers and malls and all this commercial building. And Houston was just a boom town. They were building high-rise after high-rise after high-rise. Matter of fact, when everything busted, Houston was called the see-through city. And that was because all these glass high-rises, there was nobody in them, and you could see all the way through them. They were called the see-through city. But anyway, what was happening was that these S&Ls were sitting there, savings and loan, and then these developers would come in and say, look, we're going to do a $10 million project. Here's our plans, here's our financial projections, and all of this. We need $10 million. And the S&L says, well, we can't loan you the full $10 million. You've got to put down some money. Well, something started happening, and this led to the Keating Five. We'll get to that. John McCain was part of that. But all of a sudden, the S&L says, look, we want these loans out there. We want all this money coming back in. We will take a 25% position in your development as down payment. So those were ranging anywhere from 25 to 40% that the S&Ls were taking ownership into these developments. So not only would they get their loans repaid, they would get benefit from the 25 to 40%. So all these developers were going all over, hey, we don't have to put down any money. Well, when the market went bad, the S&L went bad because they had no money sitting there. They had loaned it all out and only had a equity position. So all these contractors or owners of these properties would walk into the S&L and just drop the keys to the building on their desk and say, "See ya." And there was nothing the S&L can do. Okay, so they're all going out of business. They're all shutting down. So George H.W. Bush says, no, wait a minute. Yeah, we have the FDIC, which at that time went up to anywhere from 100 to 150,000 per deposit. Says, no, we'll cover it. We'll bail out the savings and loan industry. This was the first major bailout in the United States. And it was a debacle. And out of the Keating Five, John Keating, John McCain, and 3 others, 4 went to jail. Guess who did not go to jail? John McCain. For some reason, he just, okay, you just got sucked into it. No problem, we'll leave you alone. Yeah, right. Had all these bills and stuff going through Congress that supported the S&L. That was his role in there. And it led to this debacle. Now, and it took years to get over that. I mean, all of a sudden, banks were requiring a 40% down payment or equity payment into a deal. 40%. So a mall developer like Simon & Simon, they wanted to go out and do a $50 million mall. Well, they had to put down $20 million. So guess what happened to commercial real estate? It shut down. Nobody had 40% to put up. Now, some developers, and Simon & Simon did this, they sold off some malls, the older malls, to get money to build new ones. So they were having to liquidate an income stream to get a new income stream. Well, not everybody had those kind of assets. All right, let's go to the next Bush. George W. Bush, 2008. A lot of you still remember the crash of 2007 and 8 of the housing industry, which led to a crash in the economy. Now, in those years, 2006, 7, and 8, I worked with a company, and we were certified by states, mostly North and South Carolina. I covered South Carolina. They covered North Carolina. And we did CEU classes, certified education units, that were required every year for a lot of industries, nursing, attorney, and all sorts of things. Well, this was the banking industry. And I would go around South Carolina holding these classes because everybody had to have their CEU, their certification, or they couldn't operate anymore. And I'd go around from city to city, and we'd rent a hotel room and come in, and there were strict guidelines. If you were 10 minutes or more late, you couldn't come into the class that day. Strict guidelines. And if you came back from lunch 10 minutes late, you were gone. But we're sitting here in the big housing boom of the early 2000s, and you had subprime lending. Subprime lending, which meant that you didn't have to put down anything. Where have we heard that before? Back in 89 and 90. You don't have to put down anything. You don't even have to have a job. We're not even going to do a credit report, but we're going to loan you a 100% mortgage, and we'll even loan you the closing cost. Well, they were running these loans like crazy. I knew guys and ladies that were making anywhere from $30,000 to $300,000 a month off these loans. I did a thing, a company had me go down to Florida. I got permission from the state and coordinated with Florida for me to go down and do training this one. I knew the owners. He says, come on down, do some training. We worked it out. I went down to Florida. They had a couple, young couple. I mean, young. He had set up, he and his wife were making $300,000 a month, running basically a chop shop on subprime mortgages. He set up telemarketing to market subprime mortgages. And he doesn't talk about the interest rate, anywhere from 9% to 12 to 14% interest because you're bad credit. He's talking about the monthly payment. They sold it by the monthly payment. He was rocking and rolling. And then they were in the process of building a $1.5 million house on the beach in Florida. I think he was out of Tampa Bay. Out of Tampa. Then the crash hit. She was pregnant. Crash hit. They lost everything all of a sudden. And they spent all their money every month. They didn't put anything aside. They thought they had a gravy train the rest of their life. But anyway, and I can remember sitting in classes. I had one class. It was about 40 people, mostly subprime lenders. And this is 2007. I remember this. And today we were teaching an ethics class and a morals class. There were 2 4-hour sessions. 4 hours on ethics and 4 hours on morals of the industry. Interesting classes, folks, and some interesting discussions, especially in this class. I walked out of that class and I said to myself, half of you guys need to be in jail right now. I said it to myself, not to them. That'd probably beat me up. But I was warning them because it was coming. I said, subprime lending is coming to an end, because I had connections with the FHA, and I would talk to them all the time, and they would send us updates and briefings and stuff for our training. And they were telling me, they said, look, subprime's going away. We're going to stop subprime lending. It's killing us. And I'm trying to tell these guys in class in a nicer way than what I'm saying it here. Hey, if you're in subprime, start moving away from that. Go get certified by the FHA to do FHA lending. And they're all just laughing at me, literally laughing at me in class. And some of their comments about ethics and morals would blow you away. The problem was, once they sat through that 4 hours of each class, they had to be certified. They can't sleep through the class, but they get certified from sitting there, because there's no exam at the end. So we're sitting here, in 2006, 7, and 8, rocking and rolling in the real estate. Real estate agents are telling people, hey, look, interest rates are low. Let's move you from this house. We can get you to a bigger house with the same mortgage payment. And they were selling properties like crazy. Homes were being built. Appraisers were being paid to, and a lot of them went to jail. That's why I'm saying this. We're in cahoots with the real estate agents and even some of the lenders, the mortgage lenders, to appraise them higher than normal. And there were in North Carolina. We sat there. My partners and I went up and looked at it because they were appraising these houses way over market. And well, they got caught. The developers and the appraisers and the closing attorneys and everything, they all went to jail. But all of a sudden, you had all these people sitting here in these homes that were overappraised by $150,000, $250,000, and they couldn't sell them because they had mortgages more than they could sell it now. They were stuck with it. But the people went to jail. There was a company here. They tried to get me to go to work for them here locally. And I had heard things. And a friend of mine, well, an acquaintance, I should say, worked for them. He says, Richard, you need to come. You need to go work for us. You look at all the money you can make. So he kept pounding. So I went down there and met with him. Okay, fine, Danny. I asked questions. I saw exactly what they were doing. So about 2 months later, they're in the headlines. I knew this was coming. They were crooks. And that company, what happened is what they were doing was trying to get you to invest into rental homes, and they would do all the paperwork, the financing, et cetera, et cetera. And all of a sudden, you're using somebody else's money to own rental homes. So this one guy gets sucked into it. He goes down and he signs the documents to buy a house. Well, about a month later, he gets like 7 or 8 letters with his mortgages on different properties with his name on them. He's going, what the heck? I was only going to I'm buying one house. How did I end up with 8? So he tried to call them, but they wouldn't take his calls. So he had a friend in the FBI. He goes to his friend and shows him all these documents. And he says, what's going on here? He says, oh, you got scammed. What they were doing, folks, and this is how the system worked then. He would sign the documents to buy a specific house as an investment. But when they would submit an application, there would be a credit run, but it took up to 90 days for all of those things to hit your credit, that all those reports were requested. So they were requesting all of these, so they submitted all of these documents on 8 houses at one time to different lenders, and nothing was showing up. So 8 loans were made, and what happened was the attorney for this company forgot to change the names on 7 of them and left his name on there. They all went to jail. My acquaintance did not go to jail because he turned state's evidence and kept his fanny out of jail. However, he could never have a license of anything in the state of South Carolina other than a driver's license. So you see, all this stuff goes on. Let me go back. I pulled out this morning. I was thinking about this. George W. Bush wrote his autobiography after he left the office. It's called It's called Decision Points. Pretty good book. The first thing I turned to when I got this book, I ordered it, I wanted to go to the financial crisis. Well, this is last chapter, chapter 14, page 439, where he talked about the financial crisis. It's quite lengthy. He talked about Afghanistan and Iran and 9/11 and all this stuff. But in this, he says this is where they're in the big meeting. You got Secretary of Treasury Hank Paulson, you got Ben Bernanke, Federal Reserve Chairman, and other people sitting in this room. Lehman Brothers, which got eaten up in 2008 and 9. They let them fail. So anyway, this is what he said. This is what Hank Paulson was telling the president. The situation is extremely serious. He and the team briefed me on 3 measures to stem the crisis. First, the Treasury will guarantee all $3.5 trillion in money market mutual funds, which we're facing depositor runs. Second, the Fed would launch a program to unfreeze the market from commercial paper, a key source of financing for businesses across the country. Third, the Securities and Exchange Commission would issue a rule temporarily preventing the short selling of financial stocks. These are dangerous steps, Hank Paulson said, but America's financial system is at stake. Now, I could go on and read other things there, but just to kind of give you a feel, they were creating the situation there that they've created here. Low interest rates, lending like crazy. Now, the $3.5 trillion that's talked about in George Bush's book, they were going to have to print all that money. Remember, we went into inflation after that? When Obama took office, we had inflation. So we're doing the same thing over and over again. Then you had this big meeting with Bush, Obama, and McCain, who were the presidential candidates at the time, and a bunch of other people, and came up with this big deal. Remember, they were telling us, if we don't do something today, this is a Friday, that week, he said, if we don't pass this bill by Friday, come Monday morning, you will not be able to get money out of your ATM. They were scaring us to death. They scared everybody, and they were basically lying. They passed the bill on Friday, but no money was going into the banks for 90 days, and nothing happened for 90 days. You could still go to the ATM or to the counter and get your money. Now, they're sitting here now trying to tell us that there was a run on the bank at SVB and Sovereign Bank and the other one. Well, the CEOs have come out and they says, we don't know what they're talking about. There was no run on the bank. No. Now, you might have heard the phrase the last few days, unrealized losses. Unrealized losses. This is what they used in 2008 to pass this bill. This massive $800 billion bill to save the banks. It was a buyout. It was a buy-off, excuse me. They let Lehman Brothers bite the dust because they lean more toward the Republicans, conservatism. Remember what Obama did to the car dealers? That's another story. But here is an unrealized loss, and that rule still sits here today, folks. Unrealized loss. The rule says this. Okay, I'll give you an example. Let's say your bank owns $10 billion of mortgages. $10 billion. Well, you have $10 million in total mortgages that have missed at least one payment. That's an unrealized loss because it's not in default until they miss 3 consecutive payments. Okay, you with me? You hold $10 billion worth of mortgages, receiving payments on $10 billion worth of mortgages. 10 million, or like 1%, have missed 1 payment. But under the unrealized loss rule, you have to categorize all $10 billion as losses instead of just 10 million. And this is what they've been running on, and they won't change it. It's a hiccup in there that they want, a little catch, that they can go out, all these unrealized losses. Now, in 2008, when Obama took over, the Obama administration put his federal agents in banks. I've got a good friend. He's a commercial, one of the top commercial lenders in this area. And he says they set up office in our bank. And they scrutinized every loan that application that came in, every one of them. And they would say yay or nay. And my friend had a client that was a big developer, had lots of money in the bank, and all of his properties were in great shape, and he came in to do another development. And the federal guy sitting there says, no, he is a high risk. Do not loan him any more money. High risk? Where's the risk? He already has tenants signed up for his new shopping center, and they're quality tenants. They're national tenants. And that went on for several years, just shutting down the banking industry. One government official in there running the show, taking it out of the free market enterprise system. And that's what they're trying to do today. We've heard a lot of rumors, stories, and now some things are being confirmed about Silicon Valley Bank. Folks, it appears that bank was a massive slush fund for powerful people, including now the Bidens. A report is out this morning stating that there are documents showing how the Bidens have been paid by the Chinese. Documents showing it. You think what Biden is doing is bad. You start putting all these things together, and it starts scaring you. Now, over the weekend, let me read this, what Biden had to say yesterday. He said, that's how capitalism works. Investors who lost money. Well, this kind of goes back to when Obama took over General Motors. And they filed bankruptcy, and they took over, and all these shareholders and bondholders told by the courts, the bankruptcy courts, tough, you're out. Well, that's not how it works when you're a bondholder or a preferred stockholder. You had an equity position. Now, just common stock's a different story. So basically here, he's saying that's how capitalism works. Well, yeah, you take risks and you win or lose. But Biden's trying to jump on that. But let's go back to this weekend. The FDIC, well, even before, SVB was trying to find its own buyer. Nobody would bite. Now, what does that tell you? Nobody would bite. They had $211 billion or $210 billion in assets. Nobody would bite. because of their reputation. So then the FDIC goes in and shuts them down Friday, and they try to sell it over the weekend through auction. Sources close to that situation have come out and said the FDIC had a list of who could bid and who couldn't. And then the bidders that came in wanted guarantees from the FDIC that they would not have fallback, that they would not get stuck with the liabilities. And the FDIC said, nope, we're not guaranteeing that. But then Sunday night, the FDIC comes out and says, oh, everybody's protected. Nobody's going to lose any money. It's no big deal. We got everybody covered. Well, now everybody is out there saying that means they just put out a blanket statement that if a bank goes under now, they will protect everybody over and above the FDIC insurance. You see the corner they've backed themselves into? Or backed us into? Now, they were screaming and yelling over the weekend, well, you have all these corporations that have $2, $3, $4, $10 million worth of payroll money sitting there, and they've got a payroll to meet next week. Can they meet their payroll? I mean, they were throwing out all kind of stuff. Now, this morning, Ken Griffin, the founder of Citadel, a financial company, said this: capitalism is falling apart in front of our eyes. The market is strong enough that the Feds did not need to step in the way they did. And I agree. Care of itself. Maybe nobody bought it over the weekend, but negotiations could have continued. You see what's happening here? So between those three banks that they shut down, they had assets of $331 billion. So you and I, the taxpayer, are going to have to cover that. So that means the government is just going to print more money. It's going to drive up inflation even more. Will it drive up interest rates? Well, people are saying now that the Fed's not going to raise rates next week because of what's going on. They need to, because what they were doing is what helped cause this problem. You had higher taxes, higher inflation, and more regulations, and more spending by the government. And these banks were lending more and more, and they were not able to cover interest payments on their deposits. The other thing to look at here is, in the past, the private sector bought things out. One speculation, let me go back to this. Some people feel that people like Jamie Dimon and Bank of America and Wells Fargo, some of the big banks, didn't want anything to do with the SVB. Because back in 2008, when they went in and bought the little banks, they got burned. The government came back and burned them and stuck them with all the liabilities, all the problems, and didn't help them out of it. Typical Obama, typical Marxism. So a lot of the banks now are sitting there going, we will, burn me once, shame on me. Or shame on you. Burn me twice, shame on me. So they weren't doing it again. They weren't even at the table this weekend, the big boys. Is the FDIC going to step in and take over and run these three banks? Will they become federal banks? Even this morning, people are saying that these will become banks run by the federal government. Is this a step into nationalizing the banking system? Is it a step into moving toward digital currency? We don't know the answers yet. But in some ways, it looks that the answer to those questions might be yes. One number that came out yesterday, unrealized losses in banks is $620 million. Well, again, I explained what unrealized losses are. Now, why, and the other thing that the FDIC would not do over the weekend, they would not open the books. They would not let people see the books. Really? What is there to hide? Hidden payments? Hidden payments to political organizations, to PACs, PACs, slush funds? Chinese money to the Bidens, maybe? What's it going to reveal? Hidden payments and investments to China? We know that SVB and China had a thing going on. So what is there to hide? Just some questions, folks, we are asking, that you need to be asking. We're only seeing or being given a tip of the iceberg here. Now, I heard some people on Fox News, Fox Business this morning, they were asked, are there going to be any more bank takeovers, bank failures? And no, the Fed's not going to let that happen. What? What do you mean the Fed's not going to let that happen? Going back to Ken Griffin's comment, we're seeing capitalism fall apart in front of our eyes. We're seeing socialism take over America here. And they're doing it through the banking system, through the healthcare system, and other ways. And our washing machines. Biden wants to force washing machine manufacturers to limit the flow of water per cycle. Really, that's going to help in climate control, he says. That will help the climate crisis. Really? I mean, it's beyond any type of common sense or reason, this climate stuff. You heard me talk about that the other day. Steve Moore said, you can't just keep doing this month after month, year after year, borrowing trillions and trillions of dollars. And so what happened, because of the Biden spending and debt policies, is that not only did inflation go up, but interest rates have gone up. Harris, as you know, he's speaking to the announcer there, the Fed has had to raise interest rates 8 or 9 times, and they're talking about more interest rate increases to come, and that's caused a lot of financial problems for these big banks in the interest rate as the interest rates go up. And of course, the FDIC says, the federal government will guarantee all deposit at the bank's access to their funds. Oh boy. It's crazy, isn't it, folks? Well, you've got this inverse thing going here. With high inflation, high interest rates, low yields, and low deposits, and it's all bubbling over. Even if SVB was a corrupt bank, it's affecting all the banks. Now, they're trying to sit there and say the banking system is sound, and I believe that overall it's sound. These big banks, most bankers know how to do it. Now, of course, they're pointing the finger. Oh, Trump did this. He changed the rules, and well, everybody's come out, even Democrats that were part of that committee that helped change those banking laws, the Dodd-Frank laws, and says, no, nothing we did, it caused what's going on. Nothing they did by helping the banks do better caused the bank to be corrupt or be creative or take high risk. Now, has the FDIC been slack in following up on these banks and doing their audits every year, or have they just been letting everybody slide? Or are they just going after the banks they don't like? Just like their justice system. We're going to prosecute all the conservatives and the MAGAs and all the left-wing radicals. We're going to let them go free. So again, we're talking about how we got here. Do we need the Lone Ranger, folks? You know? Okay, here he is. Here, bring him on.
The Lone Ranger.
All right, the Lone Ranger. Bring him in here. So Larry Kudlow said this. It was a classic asset-liability mismatch. The borrowing rate exceeded the return on assets. This is like the inflation rate is higher than your wage increase. So their borrowing rate exceeded the return on assets. The yield curve was upside down, and they didn't know how to deal with it. Well, this administration doesn't know how to deal with anything. Everything they do is reverse brainstorming. How much worse can we make it? Now, they might not be alone in flunking their risk management, but they sure did flunk, and I think that's the biggest problem with that SVB has. And I think that's what I was talking about. Was SVB left alone in audits because they were slush funding money? I don't know. Then the banks start selling assets. They chase lower prices. It's like catching a falling knife. You can't do it. So their equity investors were wiped out. Management was properly thrown out, and now the government owns it and is running it. We'll see how they do. And Elizabeth Warren has stuck her big nose into all this. Elizabeth Warren, for your information, hates banks. She hates capitalism. She wants to take over all the banks. I mean, she really does. Now, let's go back. This isn't going to surprise you. To the Founding Fathers. Now, this is an area that I think maybe if they were to go back, they would have come out with some clearer language on this. And they didn't. It's probably one area, and you know, I don't blame it on Adam Smith. Adam Smith was great, set up a great free enterprise system, capitalism as we call it today. But this is an area that was not adequately implemented. They were coming out of a devastating depression when the Constitution was adopted. All that debt from the war and the Articles of Confederation really didn't help them that much. And under the pressure from both European and American financial interests, a whole series of policy errors were committed, which have continued to this day. For example, the issuing of money was turned over to a private consortium of bankers who set up a privately owned bank called the Bank of the United States. Today, we call that the Federal Reserve System. They manage the money, printing, issuing, the whole works. And another thing let me go back to 2008. What was happening there is all these banks and the FHA and Freddie and Fannie were putting together these mortgage packages, And they put in a lot of subprime loans, a lot of bad loans in there, and they were selling them to everybody, even the Europeans, the Chinese, and everybody. And then so when the market crashed, it was a ripple effect throughout America and Europe and everybody else that bought those packages. And we're probably seeing some of that today. You have subprime loans today. There's a few more restrictions on it. But Thomas Jefferson was indignant about all of this. And this is what he said. If the American people ever allow the banks to control the issuance of their currency, first by inflation and then by deflation, the banks and corporations that will grow up around them will deprive the people of all property until their children will wake up homeless on the continent their fathers occupied. The issuing power of money should be taken from the banks and restored to Congress and to the people to whom it belongs. Now, it's interesting that he says the banks, inflation and deflation, the banks and corporations that will grow up around them will deprive the people of all property until their children wake up homeless. The people that don't own homes in America today is a larger number now than it was 20 years ago or 30 years ago. I think I'm correct in that. But it's interesting, he said, the banks and corporations. So those other corporate mortgage companies, maybe the stock market, investments into real estate. I mean, when you start looking at that menagerie that got created from all of this, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mae, they came later. All right, it's crazy. The bank was allowed, this is going back to the Founding Fathers, the bank was allowed to issue 3 or 4 times more paper notes or loans than it had in assets. This is called fractional banking because the bank has only a fraction of the assets needed to back up the paper money or credit which it had issued. Jefferson again protested by saying this: the banks themselves were doing business on capital assets, 3/4 of which were fictitious. And that's what we're doing today. Let me give you an example. I deposit $1 into my savings account. I have $1 sitting there. Now, I know you can't just deposit $1, but this is for discussion. Make it simple. I put $1 in there. So the bank agrees to pay me 1/2 of 1% annual interest on my $1. That's what they're about paying today. It's even less. So I'm going to get 1/2 of 1%. Let's make it simple. 1%. We'll get 1% on my $1. So at the end of the year, they're going to pay me a penny. However, under the banking laws, today you only have to keep 10% of your assets, of your loans on deposit. 10%. So this $1 now, they can loan out $9. 9 loans, making 5%. Let's say 5%. So 9 loans, 5 cents per dollar, 5%. So they bring in, over a year, they bring in 45 cents. But what are they going to pay me for my $1? 1 cent. So they have 44 cents left over. This is fractional banking. Jefferson foresaw that the banks would inflate the economy by loaning out fictitious paper with no assets behind it. This would boom the economy. Then, when financiers had lured borrowers into a precarious position, they would call for a bust and foreclose on the property for which the bank had virtually furnished nothing. Again, this is what happened in 1989 and 90 with the savings and loan. Jefferson foresaw it 200 years earlier. Because these guys are smart and students of history. Because you had the Rockefellers that went back to the 1600s that were doing this in Europe and making tons of money off the people. At the first signs of a pending bust, Jefferson lamented, this fictitious capital is now to be lost and to fall on somebody. It, the bank, must take on those who have property to meet it, and probably, on the less cautious part, who, not aware of the impending catastrophe, have suffered themselves to contract or to be in debt, and must now sacrifice their property of a value many times the amount of the debt. We have been truly sowing the wind and are now reaping the whirlwind. Again, that was Thomas Jefferson. We live, and I've been saying this since the 1980s, on a false economy because all of it is built on debt. All of it. And he understood that when he talked about economy being built on debt instead of wealth. He said this, at the time we were funding our national debt. We heard much about a public debt being a public blessing, that the stock representing it was a creation of active capital for the ailment of commerce, manufacturers, and agriculture. This paradox was well adapted to the minds of believers in dreams. Jefferson, Jackson, Lincoln all tried to get the monetary program turned around so that Congress would control the money and banking system again. They succeeded, all of them, on a short-term basis. Now, they wanted to get rid of the boom or bust cycle. At one point, when the idea seemed to be catching on, the London Times came out with a frantic editorial stating, if that mischievous financial policy, which had its origin in the North American Republic during the late war in that country, the Civil War, should become indurated down to a fixture, then that government will furnish its own money without cost. It will pay off its debts and be without debt. It will have all the money necessary to carry on its commerce. It will become prosperous beyond precedent in the history of the civilized governments of the world. The brains and the wealth of all countries will go to North America. That government must be destroyed, or it will destroy every monarchy on the globe. They were afraid of the free banking system. They were afraid of wealth being built without debt. These were the globalists of the time. And it wasn't that many years later that that mentality started flowing in to the United States. And that's where we had Woodrow Wilson and his cronies trying to build a one-world government. Jefferson said about the latter days of his life, we are overdone with banking institutions, which have banished the precious metals and substituted a more fluctuating and unsafe medium. These have withdrawn capital from useful improvements and employments to nourish idleness. These are evils more easily to be deplored than remedied. He just described today. Nourish idleness. What did they do when the pandemic hit? Pumped phony money into the system. Phony money into the system, which drove up inflation, has driven up interest rates, and is killing the economy. Just like I said at the beginning of the program, we can attribute everything that's going on in the economy of the United States right now, with banking, with everything else, to policies of the federal government. They're killing us. They are literally killing the economy. Jefferson also said on another occasion, we are completely saddled and bridled, and the bank is so firmly mounted on us that we must go where it will guide. Wow. All right. We are at the end of the Medlock Post today. But I want to let everybody know one thing as we go out today. Do not mistake the weakness of the current president and the administration as the weakness of America. America is as strong as its people. And by making, you would be making a deadly mistake thinking we, the people, Americans, are weak. Do not underestimate we, the people. Thank you for being here today. May God bless you. And that, folks, is the Medlock Post radio show for today, March 14th, 2023. May God bless America.